Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's so I remember I. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the group. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you're joining me, whether live or whether you're catching me up after on one of the many podcast platforms, or whether video is archived on YouTube or Facebook or on X. This almost for a minute was going to be the show that didn't happen. I was super excited about tonight for a number of reasons. A, I'm always happy to talk to you guys, and B, one of my favorite people on the entire planet, one of my best friends, is joining me. And so I think I'm going to come on maybe 15 minutes early, because he's always a prompt fellow, and we'll have a chat. Come up here to my little loft studio. My light blows, one of my lights. Fix that. Takes maybe 5 minutes to get a globe and such. And then my internet is dead. Nothing. Takes me a few minutes to fix that. And then this part was my own fault. I think I hadn't changed my camera settings from when I last used it, so the camera wasn't working. Anyway, eventually I'm on just in time. Now, maybe I'll take blame for the last. The first two, I think, was the Darrow from the Caverns. As many of you know, I'm making a feature film about the Shaver mystery and UFOs, Ray Palmer, Richard Shaver, the creation of modern UFO belief. And sometimes when you get too close to those Darrow, those evil underground aliens, they will hit you with their tamper. Speaking about the Shaver mystery, it just played a bunch of festivals this past weekend. I feel very honored, and I'm so grateful to everybody involved that we won our 5th Best Documentary Award, this time at the Berlin Sci-Fi Film Festival. I had a wonderful time at the Milwaukee Paracon, where I was fortunate enough to be able to present the film and do a presentation about Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer after that screening. As I said, there's already been several screenings this month. There's still 2 more in October. If you're in Provo, Utah, or anywhere nearby, we are playing at FilmQuest, which is one of the country's greatest genre film festivals. That's at the Valor downtown in Provo, Utah, between October 24 and November 2nd. So check that out. If you're in the UK, anywhere near Essex, we're playing the Black Sunday Film Festival's Halloween event at the Everyman in Chelmsford, which is Saturday, the 26th of October. But enough about Shaver, although I'm sure we won't be able to resist talking about it a little bit because my guest tonight has been involved with the film with me from the very development. He was the first person I talked to when I had an idea about the movie. He's an author, illustrator, and biblical paranormal researcher. He lives in, I always mispronounce it. He lives in a town in Texas because he'll give me a hard time if I try to pronounce Waxahachie or whatever it's called, with his children and beautiful, long-suffering wife. Beyond his lifelong love of art and comics, his life has been consumed with the study of archaeology, cryptozoology, ufology, and astronomy in order to better understand the Bible, its teachings, and the one behind its creation. So I'm delighted to welcome back one of my best friends and my old co-host on the Mysterious Library show that used to be on this network at this time. The evening, it was always Tuesday 9 p.m. before I moved Talking Weird here. The one, the only Jason McLean.
Thank you, Dean. It's Waxahachie.
Waxahachie.
Okay, so there's actually a long-standing debate. Is it Waxahachie or Waxahachie? My favorite joke, and I heard this joke as a kid long before I ever moved here, right? There's two guys going through Waxahachie, and they couldn't figure out is it Waxahachie, Waxahachie. So they pull off into the Dairy Queen, and they say, "Ma'am, could you very slowly pronounce the name of where we are?" And she says, "Dairy Queen." So yeah, no, it's fair. You don't have to pronounce it correctly because no one can either.
Well, you always have the excuse that you're a Texan. That's why you can't pronounce things. I think Australians even have a harder time
in my life,
or at least I do when I try to. Here we go. Some flat Rockland is joking about my horrible pronunciation, but everybody probably finds it hilarious. There's so many people in the chat tonight. No doubt many of them are here just to see you. And people are joking about the Darrow. I'm looking so forward to this show because I actually I had somebody else booked, and when somebody cancels on me, I always used to want to go to you, and I went to you so often. I normally don't these days. I normally go, I don't want to bother Jason. He's always been my go-to. He's saved my bacon so many times. I thought, I'm going to see. I might throw him under the bus at the very beginning. So you were the first person I asked this time, and I was so glad that you could do it.
Well, yeah, no, enough things have sort of cleared out that I can do this a little more often. A lot of projects, little irons in the fire, as they would say. But yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. Trying to think, there was actually something I was going to say, but it slipped my mind. Anyway, it's always great to be here. Love hanging with you, Dean. You're great. Show's great. Everything's great. I'm just gonna sit here and drink.
And the audience will get a bit of a break from the Shaver mystery from me tonight. Although I should say that you were the first person I talked to about the project, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, and it started on Mysterious Library because we did a Shaver mystery episode, and it rejigged my interest in the mystery. So if it hadn't been for Mysterious Library, there would be no Shaver mystery film, and there would be no Man Who Invented Flying Saucers. So you're
saying it's my fault? Is that what I'm hearing?
Partly. I mean, you're certainly a co-producer with me, and you're in the film, so you're a big part of it. But I know people here tonight probably hear about Bigfoot and about cryptids because that's what I promised. So I shouldn't drift too far into the realm of the Darrow. We might get to the Darrow at some stage, but maybe we should.
Why shouldn't we?
Well, it's hard not to talk about those little devils, particularly when they're hitting me with their Tampa rays.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why you asked me on, because I can still drive. I still have access to everything. So worst case scenario, I could have made it happen.
That's I bet you were getting ready to when everything was failing.
I really was. I was thinking real hard about maybe like starting off all the things, like give you a little bit more time to log in. It's like
I just made it, man.
You had like 45 more seconds before I started pushing buttons.
I think when I came on, actually, I think you were starting to fiddle with it because I was like, "What's going on there?"
Mm-hmm.
But Jason's getting ready to launch. But maybe before we do kick off and go into Bigfoot territory, maybe let our audience know, because many of them we used to watch you here on Mysterious Library. What have you been up to? Like, what's been going on in Mr. McLean world?
Well, like I said, a lot of irons in the fire. My daughter just got married, and so we've been dealing with that. Just kind of relaunching some things. I will actually be going through. I can announce this part now. Some other things are being restructured. Siri Papers will be relaunching at some point. I'm still working on that, but I'll be redoing all my eschatological work. So hopefully that should be done at the beginning of the year. I'm working on another project. It's going to be a little slow. It's sort of it's something I've worked on for a while off and on, but I've figured out how to do it. It's in honor of my father, mechanic, who, he introduced me to sort of like the outsider art, the comics and all that. So I'm bringing back Chuppy Rules. Everything's being done by hand. It's going to be published on 8.5 by 11. So it's very much a testament to the sort of older outsider art, comics that were done for, automobiles and all that. It wasn't the traditional normal Marvel and DC and Charlton stuff. This was, these were car guys who were just doing the stuff on their own. So I'm working on that. Just having a lot of fun. And, hopefully next year is going to be a lot of stuff coming out, and I'll be here talking about it.
Man, I'll be happy to talk to you about any of your projects, as I'm sure all of our audience will be delighted to hear. We did have a comment directly at you from Foot Clan, and he said, "Tell Jason that skinwalkers are just human beings that know black magic, would you?" I know that's an ongoing joke, or
I don't know. Never really talked about them. I, however, choose to believe that they are seals, or perhaps otters in skinwalker costumes.
Well, there's the otter man. There's a Kushtaka, so that's
there is
somewhat related. It's the northern climes of North America.
The problem is the only people who are going to get my joke are the people who used to be the old school Cryptomundo readers. There was a gag very early in Cryptomundo, way back in the day, where it's every cryptid was, because with the Loch Ness monster, it's like, oh, it's always misidentified otters swimming or whatever. So every cryptid is now otters just dressed as something else. But yeah, I've never even really addressed skinwalkers. So
it's fun. Speaking of otters, it is weird because there's the otter man, the Kushtaka, right? And also I was watching some, I don't know what documentary it was. I don't think it was Monster Quest. It was like a series like Boogeyman or one of the other ones. And I think they were in maybe a lake somewhere in I don't know, the UK perhaps, or Europe somewhere where there are always so otters, I assume. And there was tales there of some incredibly large and ravenous and evil otter come human. So the otter does seem to, you're right, often people see something in the water, it might just have been an otter. But perhaps there is something strange and supernatural about the otter, and perhaps that's as good a jumping off spot as it just became as anything else. Because we're going to talk about, I loved your title tonight because it was your idea, drawing Bigfoot. It's such a great idea. And I don't think we're going to just be literally talking about people who draw these things on a pad. Perhaps we will a little, but about people who, I suppose, the way I took it when you pitched the idea was that when people have these experiences, are they somehow drawing in their own brain or in their own mind the conception of what they saw? What are they drawing upon? And perhaps the otter and the otter man and that other otter creature I was talking about is an example of something perhaps natural or not natural being misinterpreted, maybe being seen as something else. What do you think about that type of thing, Jace?
Yeah, no, I like the parallels you pulled there. As an artist, one of the things you have to learn is how people see things. And this is one of the few times I'll actually focus on my own skills. Normally I'm referencing someone else's work or, someone who's got a little bit more experience, but this is literally where I live as an artist. The thing that we never really stop to consider is we don't actually see things, right? And yes, by the way, Puckwudgie Whisper, never trust an otter. They will steal your wallets. They are all jerks. That's why there's so many evil otters around. But we don't actually see things. And what I mean by that is when you look at, like, say, film, right? The image is impressed on the film and it's there, right? When we see something, what's happening is our eyes are actually brain matter. They're not a separate organ from the brain. They are very much a part of the brain, but the light comes in, hits the receptors. The information is then translated by the brain into an image, right? This is why optical illusions work, is that you're not actually seeing it. Your brain is interpreting the data and trying to make sense of it. Again, my favorite example of this, I should probably just go ahead and make one. But there's this old optical illusion of what looks like a row of windows in perspective, right? And they're cut out, and you spin them, and it looks like it's just going back and forth. Like, it doesn't even look like it's spinning. It just looks like it's going back and forth. But if you put like a tube through it, like a straw or a pen, and you spin it, it looks like your windows are moving one direction and the pen is moving the exact opposite direction. And they're actually going through each other. It's bizarre, but it's an optical illusion because you're having to try and make sense of the information it's given. If you're unfamiliar with something, your brain actually doesn't know how to interpret the data, and oftentimes you're perceiving it incorrectly. Psychiatrists have noticed, and psychologists have known for years, that when people are abroad and they're, say, walking through what you call them, those open air markets, right? If there's a lot of fruit and stuff on a table that perhaps they're not familiar with, they don't necessarily notice where one stall ends and another stall begins. They have to take time to read it and sort of, not just read like in text, but for the brain to understand it and become familiar with it. Our brain is filling in data all the time. So when you see something you've never seen before, your brain's kind of trying to have to process it. And if you add things like a fear response, stress, or even, it's just a short-lived thing, there's a lot of room for vagary in what people see. Now, this doesn't mean they're not seeing something. It just means it's not going to be as precise as we'd like it to be. It isn't like, oh, here's a photograph of what this person saw. The brain is actually trying to interpret it. And so it's very common for us to anthropomorphize things that we're unfamiliar with, meaning we make it look more human. And so when it comes time to relay that information, particularly if it's something that's larger or there's some set of fear, the creatures are described as perhaps even being taller. The appearance is more human. Details that one would think are prominent are missed, right? Great example. Okay, and if you haven't watched Donnie Cho Says Stuff, go watch it. He works a little blue, but it's sort of it's a comedy show. But one of the things that he actually addressed very early on, and I'll clean this up a little bit, is he asked why people, like, why don't we see drawings of, or why isn't Bigfoot's genitalia noticed as often? He makes a joke about it, but there's actually several answers to that. And one is, if you only have a few seconds to see something, our brain is literally hardwired to look for threats, which is eyes, meaning where is it looking, teeth, and claws, and then shoulders, right? Because that's where the brain's saying that's where the danger is going to come from, or you can see where it's moving. You're not looking for the fine details. Now, where this comes out at is, then sometimes you start adding details in your head because you're trying to remember, what did I see? And that's why when you have people who talk about lizard men, sometimes they have tails, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they look more human, sometimes they don't. The pterosaurs, right, that I work with or work on a lot, sometimes people see them as having tails, sometimes they don't. Just because they don't talk about the tail doesn't mean they didn't see the tail, just means they didn't recognize that they saw it. Because again, their brain is trying to interpret what it saw. So one of the questions becomes, like with Bigfoot, when we see some of these drawings look far more pongid, others look far more human, the question becomes, are we looking at two different types of creatures, or are some of these being anthropomorphized, or even overly, let's use the word pongicized, right? Because for some people, they may be saying it's a giant ape, therefore it should look more ape-esque in their head, right? And so they're taking images of gorillas and monkeys and things that they've seen in the past, and their brain sort of reconstructing it from that. Others are going to say, well, it looked more human, therefore they're going to make it look more human. And again, they're not lying. Their brain's just trying to make sense of what it is they saw and process it through their experience. If we had a group of Bigfoot hanging out in the zoo somewhere and there were pictures of them all the time, we wouldn't have that same level of distortion. But right now, particularly with Bigfoot being in the sort of popular, being sort of a popular figure, everyone now has not just apes or humans, but also different masks. Harry and the Hendersons, the Jack Links things, Doug's Monster Quest. If you watched, the way Bigfoot was depicted there, that's going to be in these people's heads and is going to color how they are remembering their encounter.
You know what? It's interesting because we get something very similar, I think, in UFO encounters with little
Yeah.
men. So if you look at the type of, and there were a number of them came out in the 90s, these kind of bestiaries or, of different alien species. And they'd have several different diminutive aliens. They'd have like different grays and little people who weren't really grays. But you could see that potentially these were just different interpretations of somebody having an experience with something similar. But this witness had drawn, tear-shaped black eyes, and this witness had drawn, more circular eyes, and this one had seen them looking less human slightly, and this one had seen them as looking more human. So as a result, in these, different, again, encyclopedias of alien beings, it seems like we're being visited by 30 different species of diminutive extraterrestrials. Now, I'll be honest, my take is probably very similar to yours, but then I'm always suspicious that the phenomenon itself might be somewhat deceptive as well. So our own senses can be deceptive, as you were saying, what we focus upon as far as we know to be more fearful and to look at. Even I had a martial art instructor who was always like, watch the hands and watch the eyes when you're fighting somebody. There are things you should be looking at, you know what I mean? But perhaps we do some of that instinctively anyway. But then, so even if our senses are kind of in this overloaded fight or flight, super doses of adrenaline running through our body can trick us when we have an encounter with the unknown. Perhaps the phenomenon itself presents itself to us in slightly different ways depending upon what we're expecting or what's the cultural norm at the time. So I wonder if there aren't all kinds of things, and I'm not just saying that's necessarily ufological either. I suspect that extends into other things we're talking about. So I wonder if
many things.
we aren't deceiving ourselves, but there's something out there that's changing almost the way it presents itself. So this person does indeed, because they're feeding into it and it's feeding into them, they do see something which actually, if there wasn't objectivity, and there isn't, but they do see something that actually does at that moment appear differently to what, another eyewitness experienced a year before, half a world away, or a day before, even, 2 miles away. That the phenomenon itself isn't shifting along with our own perceptions of it.
No, definitely, particularly when it comes to things that may be more ultra terrestrial or supernatural, completely agree. Could not agree more. But it's also, I don't think it's an either or situation, right? There's a lot of there may be a lot, again, this is one of those things where it may be the 3-body problem, right? There's way more going on here than we realize. So perhaps it's appearing differently, or perhaps it's taking on a number of different forms, and then people are then perceiving them again because they don't recognize them. To your point, I've actually pointed that out myself, is you have a lot of these supposedly different aliens, and yet if you look at them, they're like, they really do kind of fall into several very clear parameters. Like even a lot of the drawings of the insectoids, you're like, okay, so they look more like a praying mantis, but they aren't that different from, like, say, a lot of the tall whites, or even the taller grays, right? So it looks like it could be that there's multiple groups that are, again, created because of our perception, or not even our perception, but how our brain is trying to rationalize, or the encounteree's brain is rationalizing what it's seeing, but that the subject is also just different shapes, right? I mean, so I don't think it's an either or thing. It could just be both, that both is happening here.
Right.
Particularly when you start getting to things that aren't necessarily, may not have a native form in our reality. And then you have, again, just how easily our senses are deceived, or, how hard people forget how hard it is our brain actually works. Like, our brain is remarkably complicated. And some things that we take it for granted. Talk to anyone who's trying to develop AI or optics, and they'll tell you this is like, just seeing something is remarkably complicated, and the things that we can understand and know from sight is staggering. But the point still stands. When someone gives you a description of what they saw, what we need to understand is they're not, again, assuming this is someone who's telling the truth about their encounter, what they are conveying is the best information that they have. They're not lying to you if they say that they didn't see a tail, right? Or if they add a tail and you're like, well, that thing shouldn't have a tail. They're not lying to you. Their brain is trying to comprehend what it is they saw. If they're unfamiliar with it, then their brain is trying to put things together. If they think, oh, it was a lizard man, they may add a tail. They're not lying, but their brain's like, well, it's a lizard, it must be a tail, or it's a dog man, therefore it must have a tail, right? That's just kind of how these things work. Those preconceived notions slip into that, into the perception and how to explain it. I'm saying that poorly. Let me try this again. There is both our expectations, what we saw, and what exists sort of in the ether in our brain to pull from, that's creating these assemblages. So it's not that anyone's lying, or not even that they're necessarily wrong. They're just telling you what they saw. But we have to remember that everything we see is fundamentally created by our brain. That doesn't mean I'm not saying this pen isn't real, right? It's clearly real. It's objectively real. But how, I'm going to see it as a slightly different color than somebody else. But if someone's never seen a pen before and I show them this pen and then I take it away after like 10 seconds, they're going to describe it very differently because they don't know what a pen is, right? Let's say we grab someone from 600 years ago. They're going to not know what this is. And so they're not actually going to see it the way I would see it because I'm familiar with this. My brain has had time to acclimate and it knows what it's looking at. And also I'm looking at it at a time in a way that there's no stress with this pen, right? I'm not terrified of this pen. I actually really love this pen. So you put all this together, and in encounters with even just physical cryptids are going to be events of high stress 9 times out of 10. They're very brief, and the human brain is just trying to process what it is. And so we need to maybe not, we should probably do far less categorizing, but what things look like exclusively, and saying, well, this person saw this person saw this. These must be 2 different species of a thing. Nope. That's you're extracting too much information from that data. The data is not necessarily pure. It's not impure, but it's not giving you the accuracy you can draw those kinds of conclusions from.
I have some questions we'll get to in a minute as well, but I wanted to just comment on that. I think it's interesting what we're talking about, because there also might be, as you've suggested almost there, I think, there might be a spectrum or a scale. So there might be people who, for example, and I don't normally buy into this, and even though I'm a skeptic in my own way, but people might see a bear and in their terror when they watched the Bigfoot movie the other day, because it's standing on its 2 legs, might go Bigfoot, right? That's perhaps one side of the scale. Perhaps in the middle there is what we're talking about, that there is an anomalous something, not a bear, there is an anomalous something that people encounter, and either through their own focus on certain aspects of it, they're not describing it completely accurately, or the phenomenon itself, in the way that somebody like Keel or Valet might suggest, is feeding into the experience itself. Or as Greg Bishop recently wrote in the in Robbie Graham's, the late Robbie Graham's book that he edited, UFOs Reframing the Debate, that there might be this co-creation going on between us and it, expectations, and it reflecting back whatever, right? But maybe the other far side of the scale almost becomes, and I think it's still related, I think this whole scale is related, becomes even more imaginal. And this is something that Cutchin and Renner talk about in their Where the Footprints End books, is that if you're in the woods and something throws a stone at you or a rock at you, if you're already versed in Sasquatchery or Bigfoot lore or whatever we want to call it, your assumption is that's a Bigfoot throwing
Yeah.
rocks at you because that's what you've heard Bigfoots do in the woods. Or if you
Yes.
hear a howl or something hitting a tree knock, your
Mhm.
assumption is, well, I've been told that's what Bigfoots are. But you're not even seeing anything. Your mind is
Yeah.
drawing a picture of what this phenomenon is that
Mhm.
you're not even seeing. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
other very furthest end of the scale, that you're imagining and drawing and conceiving of something without
Yes.
actually having any visual interpretation, but you're still happy to go back later and say, I heard a Sasquatch, or a Sasquatch threw a
Mhm.
rock at me, or I heard a tree knock. It must have been a Sasquatch. So I do
Yes.
think that whatever's part of it we're looking at, it seems to me pretty clear that there's an input by us into what we're
Mhm.
experiencing, whatever the reality, physical or paranormal or just natural and misinterpreted, whatever these experiences are. I think it's
Right.
hard to take the observer out of this equation with the observed.
Mhm. No, you can't. I mean, you straight up can't. Like, this is, again, we've learned, and this is just fact. Any observation will necessarily affect what it is that's being observed, right? And so you began that question, or that sort of your thought with the common, oh, you just saw, someone sees a bear, maybe they think it's a Bigfoot, right? And I get that question all the time. Is, well, how do we know that all these Bigfoot sightings aren't just misidentifications of a bear? To which I respond, how do we know how many bear sightings are actually misidentified Bigfoot? Right? We work from assumptions a lot. And so the problem is, it is far more likely for someone to see something like a Bigfoot, as long as they're not seeing like the straight on face, um, or they see it, in a full stride. It is very likely that they would just say, "Oh, I just saw a bear," right? Or a moose, or some tall, big, or just I saw a person in a weird coat or something, right? It's actually far more likely to misinterpret a Bigfoot as something familiar. When I had my encounter, I thought I was looking at a blue heron, something I've seen all the time because it was a similar shape and a similar color. So my brain's like, oh, it's just a really big blue heron. That's actually really cool. It wasn't, again, but I was watching it as it got closer to me. And that's when I could see, oh, my brain could finally process that I wasn't looking at a blue heron. I wish I had been. My life would have been a lot easier. But the simple fact of the matter is, your brain is actually far more likely to assume it's something familiar than not, right? So that doesn't mean that people aren't, from time to time misinterpreting something normal for something paranormal or supernatural or whatever. In fact, I got a great story, and you can tell. And by the way, everyone in chat, you can tell this to your friends. I have a friend of mine moved up to Colorado, I think, and they've been there for a little while, and they finally allowed their blue macaw, their to go outside and sort of enjoy the fresh Colorado air. And this friend is also very much into Bigfoot and the paranormal, and so they joined this because again, it's Colorado, so there is, there's Bigfoot up there sightings, and so they have this little Facebook community for Bigfooters in that area. So this is where she lives, and she lives sort of a little further out. But for in that region, there's a lot of people there. They love to talk about Bigfoot and all that. So she's a part of this group. And the day they let their blue and yellow macaw out to start playing, they started getting reports from someone who lives relatively close to them about how they're hearing Bigfoot howls now. So to your point, yes, I am the first one to say, don't, if you're not physically looking at something and you can really see what's going on, don't necessarily assume, because I do think there's a lot of times when something that's normal or known, perhaps normal is the wrong word, known. Things that are known are mistaken for something that's unknown. Happens all the time, 100%. But more likely, particularly when we're talking about visual data, it is far more likely for the human brain to assume it's something known than something unknown. So I would suggest it's actually far more likely that people are encountering Bigfoot, and because it's not a dramatic encounter, they're just dismissing it as a bear, or if you're up north, maybe a moose or something, right? Same thing with I think a lot of people are probably seeing these pterosaurs far more often, but they're just assuming them to be blue herons or cranes, or even I've heard pelicans, right? It's just me and the other people. We just happened to take that second look. We just said, "Oh, well, this is cool. I'll take a split second to look at what I'm seeing because it's big enough or it's weird enough that I just want to, maybe you're just bored. You're like, I'm going to take a look at this cool nature thing. Oh, wait, it's not what I think it is." In the same way, I think both sides of the argument are misunderstanding how we see things, how our brains perceive things. Again, far more likely that something unknown is being mistaken for something known than rather something unknown or something known is being mistaken for something unknown. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying it's actually, particularly from a visual perspective, it's far more likely someone sees something unknown, mistakes it, and the brain just says, "Nope, you know what that is. Keep on shuffling." We ignore things all the time. One of my best friends growing up, still know him, friends since birth, in utero. Our parents were friends. This guy grew up going to my house. Okay. It wasn't until, I'm not kidding when I say this, he was 17. He was over at my house. We had, it was my birthday. We put a cake down there and he hit his head on this chandelier is the wrong word. If you grew up in the 70s and 80s, those lights that were, they came down by the chain and they were sort of, again, chandelier's the wrong thing, but they were sort of decorative, but they had like leading and, they were sort of spiky. You know what I'm talking about, right? That sort of cheaper version of the old Pizza Hut lamps, right?
Oh, yeah, like the poor man's chandelier in some ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so he hits his head on this thing and he's like, "Oh, hey, when did this get put in?" And I'm looking, I'm like, this has existed as long as the house has. You have seen this every time you've come to my house for the last 17 years of your life. And he's like, "No, this has to be new." It was such a common thing for him to see that his brain didn't pick up on it. Right? Art wouldn't work if the human brain actually perceived and properly understood what it was looking at. If your brain really genuinely understood what it was seeing, optical illusions would not work. You would never miss anything. Your brain has to make choices about what information it takes in, what it forgets, what it's ignoring. It's categorizing, and it's doing these things lickety-split. It's looking for danger. It's looking for threats. That's why it's so easy for the brain to be tricked. It's why it's so easy for the brain to just miss something, because it doesn't perceive it as a threat. Then it goes in a much lower priority. In the same way, if something is threatening or shocking, then the brain is going to actually over-exaggerate aspects of it too, particularly if it's a threat. It will appear bigger. It may appear more aggressive because your brain is in fight or flight. The teeth will be bigger. The claws will be sharper. You may not even see claws, but your brain says predator. That means claws. Rawr. That's going to be terrible for anyone who's listening because you didn't see my hands doing the thing. So that's why you got to come on and watch. You have to watch Talking Weird. You can't just listen. Otherwise, you miss my predator cat thing.
Especially when Jason's on. Yeah, you missed the almost charades game. You demonstrating. We should do a Talking Weird charades. I don't know how well that'd work. That's probably a stupid idea. But just quickly,
it would be terrible. It would be terrible for the audio.
Listen, I think everything that you said is dead on. I do think, though, it in itself raises some questions when we're talking about cryptids and cryptozoology, because it means, for example, and this might be, there's a few questions now I'm going to get to. So if you've asked a question, I'm probably going to hit it if you're live in the chat and watching now. But this is a little rabbit hole I want to go down first.
Please.
If people are experiencing something anomalous, like if it's something genuine, not just a bare mistake or a heron or whatever, then Maybe that helps tell us something about the change in popularity of certain cryptids, like why the Dogman surge in the last 20, 30 years when there wasn't one
Yes.
before then? Is it
Mhm.
because there genuinely are now dogmen, or is it because people are aware of there being dogmen, or is it because there's big, hungry, weird dog wolves on the prowl and people are just focusing on the teeth and the
Mhm.
ears and the things which stand out and they're
Mhm.
misinterpreting it in that capacity? Because something, for example, there has
Mhm.
clearly shifted in
Yeah.
the number of reports which are coming out, the number of experiences that are talking
Mhm.
about encountering essentially what looks like a werewolf after it's transitioned into its wolf shape or its
Yeah.
wolf form, its
Mhm.
bipedal wolf form.
So, yeah, and that was sort of the second half of your comment I did want to talk about, so thank you for bringing back to it. I'm gonna answer it with a story. At least it's not a song. You can all be grateful for that. Um, Actually, I'll be talking about this. I will be at the Lake Worth Monster Festival this Saturday in Lake Worth, Texas. So, which is in Fort Worth. So, if y'all are in the area, come on by. We can hobnob. And
Wow, I'd love to be there.
one of the, I'd love to have you there. I'd give you some prints. Um, Actually, I can give you a print of prints that I did. Anyway, so one of the things I noticed when I was writing my book Metroplex Monsters is that there used to be like going back to the 1800s, there was the creature, there was the monster, right? And all followed pretty typical Bigfoot lore. But then you have the Lake Worth Monster event in 69, and Jim Mars calls it the Goat Man. Well, he doesn't necessarily call it the Goat Man, but he reports the name the Goat Man, right? And I like that one. And so what I noticed is all of the local lore starts getting attributed to the Goat Man, right? And what happens after that is people actually start seeing goat people, particularly at White Rock Lake. And I'm talking full on Goat Man, horns, the backwards facing goat legs, whole 9 yards. Plenty of other accounts, they're seeing what is very clearly a Bigfoot. But after the name Goat Man becomes a thing, people start legitimately seeing goatmen or things that are tangentially connected to it, right? The backwards facing legs, the weirdness. Uh, and those are all in locations that are steeped in the paranormal, right? And the occult. So I think, again, I tend to be a all of the above kind of a thing. I'm not one to believe that there is a naturally occurring biological entity that we would call a dogman, right? Um, I there just isn't any reason to think that there's something like that out there. But does that mean that these encounters are not correct or not, that they're being made up? No. When we actually talked about this, right? Linda Godfrey's book, the in my brain went blank when you asked me about the one that turned to the guard and said Gadara, right? Oh, I just realized if y'all weren't watching that episode, and hopefully there's so many of you new listeners and viewers that you don't know the story we're talking about. Back on Mysterious Library, we
Happy
were talking
days.
about Happy Days. We were dealing with Linda Godfrey's book on the goat or on the dog man, rather, right? And one of the stories is oh, looks like the gremlins have gotten Dean. It's okay, I got this. But one of the stories was a man who encountered a dog man.
No, I'm here. I
Uh,
was just letting you have the full screen because you were telling a heck of a story. I'm just disappearing into the background while you tell the
well,
story.
that I had the jazz hands going. So anyway, the thing turns to this guard and says, Gadara. Well, in the Bible, Gadara is the location where Jesus casts demons out of one of the demoniacs. And this particular demoniac, again, had seemingly supernatural powers of people couldn't chain him up. He would break chains. He would thrash groups of people who came to try and control him. So from the very beginning, I would suggest that there is a deep connection to for a dogman to the paranormal. Hellhounds have been a thing literally forever. Anubis, which I don't like necessarily drawing the connection to dogman like others would, but that's a guardian of the dead. The simple fact of the matter is, dogs and the paranormal or dog-like creatures and the paranormal have a very long history. So I'm more inclined to think that, again, as the Dogman mythology becomes more popularized, more normalized, we'll see more of it, right? That it is, perhaps we are co-creating, as Dean has alluded to. And I think that's probably that may be a better explanation for it. But again, it could be the simple fact of the matter is people have seen dog man-like creatures and goat man-like creatures since day one. Again, I talked about this in the book also, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Enkidu, even though it said that he had the legs of a bull, that's semantics. It's basically the same kind of thing. That's a goat man from our perspective. Werewolves have been around in every culture as long as we've had culture. So while yes, I completely agree that there may be some aspect of our perception, our cultural understandings and beliefs that allow these things to take those forms, right? Like the Slender Man. We know exactly when and who and how Slender Man was created as a cultural concept. But after he was created, people started seeing him, right? And it may be that, there's the question of, are we creating them? Are they some sort of tulpa thing or mind projection, or are we simply giving form for these things? My favorite version of that thought is actually the last Nightmare on Elm Street of the good ones. With Robert Englund it being Freddy. But I think it was called The Last Nightmare, right? If y'all haven't seen this 30-year-old movie, please go watch it. It's great. But the entire premise is that the reason Wes Craven was making the Freddy movies was that essentially there was this demonic entity that was trapped within stories, and that as long as we were telling the stories, it remained in these tales and in these stories. It couldn't come out and get us. And I'm sorry for spoilers for a 30-year-old movie, but at one point we get to see the lair of Freddy, and essentially you've got like the gingerbread house, and there's all these allusions to these older stories of monsters and creatures and witches and stuff. And Freddy's just the newest incarnation of this story, because the demon itself doesn't have a native form. It's just taking on the aspects of the story that it's trapped within. We may have something like that, where these supernatural entities simply take the form of the stories that we're telling. And maybe that applies to Bigfoot. Maybe that applies to Dogman, and it certainly applies to the Goat Man stuff. But how much of it does it apply to? I don't know, because we, again, as we've always said here, we ain't got the Spookatron 5000 patent pending. No.
So I moved this and I lost you for a second then.
Sorry.
I'm so
I'm just saying, until
it's
fine. We'll go to the questions now. But like I said, until we have the Spookatron 5000, where we can objectively observe the phenomena, we're never going to really know what that answer is. We just need to know that those answers are on the table.
That should be your next book, the Spookatron 5000 patent pending.
Spookatron 5000. Yeah, I'm working on it with Egon.
We do we do have some good questions as well. Switched on audience as always, and I'll try to get to everybody's, but bear with me. So David Russell asked, this is going to be fun to answer actually. There's at least 10 different species. This is when we were talking about extraterrestrials, I believe. Do you think it's possible that there are alien species that have been on our planet for thousands of years in mountains, underground Antarctica, or the oceans? Oh boy, have you asked the right people these questions.
This would be fun.
Well,
yeah,
you go first, and then I'll chime in.
Oh no, I'll ruin your fun if I do that. Okay, I'm probably the one that's being asked, but then I want Dean to get to this. So again, I don't think that the things that are forget the stuff that's the government, right? Just to say the truly exotic stuff. I don't think it's from another planet. I don't think they're extraterrestrials, meaning that they are naturally occurring biological things. I subscribe to the fact that they are supernatural. They're from another plane of existence. And yes, they have been here since day one. Not even a question. If if you put me and Giorgio Tsoukalos at a table, we're going to agree on this sentence. The angels and demons of yesterday are the aliens of today. The difference is he's going to say we understand them better now. I'm going to say we got it right the first time. Dr. Bertram?
Yep. No, I think I agree with much of that, but of course I can't help but reference the Shaver mystery a little bit here. We also had Forbidden Planet mention the Solomon Islands have giants that live underground in underground caves, and the islanders know about them. Well, of course, as you were mentioning, there's a long history of this type of these things living by us or underneath us. It goes back to fairy faith. It goes back to Greek mythology. It goes back to biblical tales. It's been with us forever. But in regards to extraterrestrials in particular, I think it's worth noting the influence on the Shaver mystery on a lot of this. So I knew we'd get to the Darrow. The Darrow and the Tarot, according to Richard Shaver, who first wrote articles and even essays really for amazing stories that America's leading science fiction pulp magazine published or edited rather by Raymond Palmer in the 1940s. Shaver was, and this is before UFO belief burst onto the scene, just before, and it probably had a massive influence on it. Shaver was certain these things were in the caves and in the caverns. There were ancient civilizations that had left this earth, the Atlans and the Titans, who were the giants of ancient mythologies. When the sun's poisons became too much for people on the surface, the Atlans and the Titans had built this incredible underground civilization of caves and of caverns. But when the sun's poisons, as Shaver said, they were eventually going to kill these ancient beings. The reason they became giants is because they lived forever and they kept on growing, but the sun's poisons were gradually killing them. So they evacuated the planet eventually aboard spacecraft, flying saucers, and they left behind them the abandoned Darrow, as they were called, the Darrow and the Tarot. The Darrow were the good ones, the Tarot were the bad ones, without going into all the details of the semantics of what Darrow and Tarot actually mean. And those people still lived under the earth, according to Richard Shaver. And this is, again, just before people were even talking about flying saucers, the modern concept. And when flying saucers appeared in American skies, Richard Shaver said, this is the proof of what I've been writing about. And these people under the earth still have contact with extraterrestrials. The extraterrestrials still come and sometimes battle with the people under the earth. They come to try to take resources that were left behind, and there's good extraterrestrials and bad ones, and there's good underground dwellers and bad underground dwellers. So to the original question we looked at then, there is a very long history in UFO belief. Forget about the even longer history going back to biblical and fairy faith times, and wherever we want to go in any mythology, there's underground beings. There was, even just before UFO belief, something which set up the idea that these things, the sources were coming from the caverns and weren't coming from outer space. Well, they were coming from outer space as well. They were coming from both. And regarding Antarctica and that, Shaver actually suggested that you could enter the inner earth from entrances in both of these places. And then Raymond Palmer continued to make that popular. The reason that it's a popular idea in ufology is literally because of Raymond Palmer and Richard Shaver. That's the reason the idea of sources coming in and out of the poles is popular. Those were the guys who suggested that.
Yep. Yeah, it's a more complicated story. And again, as we, if you go back and watch the Mysterious Library, one of the things we bring up a lot, we talked about a lot, is the UFO community has been, at least since the 80s, deliberately infiltrated by government assets on the, at least, if not flat out agents half the time. And they have been manipulating the community and the information that got out. And this would include people we would consider to be big name ufologists, and they clearly had agendas that were not necessarily designed to bring us the truth about the phenomena, but rather to perpetuate a thought, a perspective or a story that the government found, whatever story was at least advantageous to the government at the time. So a lot of things that are discussed commonly today are as Dean has pointed out, reinterpretations of older concepts that came that again have been there forever, right? Fey lore in ufology are almost 1-to-1 with a few minor changes. So it may be that the world that we live in is just stranger, and that essentially the UFO phenomena is just a new interpretation of this much older phenomena.
Indeed. We have a question directed to you, and this is still on the giants issue from Vincent earlier in the show. Biblical giants, connection to Bigfoot, Jason.
Okay, so this is going to be a yes and a no. The quick answer is no. I don't think that actual biological Bigfoots are necessarily connected to the Nephilim. I think that there's sufficient evidence, physical evidence, that they are, again, some form of primate. However, there may be, the intersection may actually be more along the lines of, if there are Nephilim still around, essentially they are being called Bigfoot and therefore are ignored. Not ignored, but we're not interpreting them for what they are. This is sort of an idea that we've talked about a lot, that why certain paranormal entities may want to perpetuate the Bigfoot concept is because it allows them to maneuver and sort of interact with humans directly without any fear from us that we're dealing with a supernatural entity, right? I've asked, where's the line between worship and research in a lot of cases? So it may be entirely possible that one of the other reasons that the Bigfoot mythology has been perpetuated the way it has is that it also provides cover for Nephilim. Not that Nephilim are Bigfoot, but rather as long as we're calling them that, then we don't recognize them for what they are, because we're making an assumption about their identity. I will only going off of information that's publicly available. I think it's sufficient to say that the naturally occurring biological entities that we would call Bigfoot are pongids. They are some form of ape. Anything other than that, I don't think would be classified as a Bigfoot, but it may want us to think that it is.
Fascinating, man. Now, of course, we have to address Horace's question. Horace is the professor emeritus of astronomy and physics at Michigan State University, a good friend of the show, a good friend of mine, and a good friend of Jason's. And he asks, and this is when we were talking earlier about the way things present themselves, do those conception problems mean we should only pay attention to photographs which can at least be examined later on? So I think he was talking about when we perceive something or conceive of something, that maybe if we had something photographic, at least we could look at it.
Yeah. So that's sort of the answer. The true answer is no. And what I mean by that is every piece of data is data that we need, right? But we just need to recognize it for what it is, because this problem exists in mainstream science as well. There are photographs that are, again, the problem is who's looking at the photographs? Human beings. We can misinterpret photographs also in video. Even objective information can be misinterpreted or sort of misseen by us. So it isn't that I'm saying that eyewitness testimony is of no value. I'm certainly not saying that. What I'm saying is we need to understand it for what it is. We need to not draw too many conclusions from it. All I'm saying is that data needs to be interpreted for what it is, and not for more than what it is, but also not for less. Because if we were to remove eyewitness testimony at the end of the day, that means we'd have to remove most of science, because all science is a human being observing something in a laboratory or through some sort of machine, right? Or observing a phenomena, like through a telescope or whatever. And there have been plenty of times in human history where a scientist observing something has misinterpreted it. The canals on Mars is actually my favorite, where the guy was actually seeing the blood vessels in his own eye because of what because of the lens he was looking through. So again, a lot of people say, well, if we can't do this, then why do it at all? all human endeavors are valuable because everything is one chain is one link in a series of chain of events, right? We only grow because other people have grew before us and gave us something to work with, and then we take it and we carry that torch and then we pass it on to the people for the future. We may never fully understand any of this. I tend to think we won't. Scientists 200 years ago laid the foundation so that we can learn, so that people 100 years later can learn, so that we would know more and so that people in the future would know more. In fact, it's not only likely, it is almost a certainty that 1,000 years from now, scientists will look back on our understanding of quantum physics today and laugh at us and say, well, how primitive. That our interpretations and theories are just what we can do now, but they will lay a foundation upon which new technologies and new observations can be built and made that will allow us to peel back these layers even more, and we will change our understanding of how it's designed. No human endeavor is ultimately in vain because it is just a step in this progress towards future, towards knowledge, towards wisdom. We just have to do so carefully. We have to allow for nuance. We have to not get ahead of ourselves. We just need to understand that the data is what the data is, and not get too far, not draw too much. Because all data is useful in the ways that it's useful. It's unuseful if you're using it in a way that it's not useful.
And speaking of nuance, we have a question from
Mhm.
Donnie Cho himself.
Oh,
Jason, question. Who would win in a fight? An Anunnaki, a Nephilim, or an Arcturian?
So I'm going to have to answer that on Donnie's show, but here's what I would say. Because ultimately, Donnie's not really asking the deep question. The real answer to this is Santa Claus.
He wins every time, Jason.
Every time.
I can't say how much fun it was having you. You should come back and co-host this show with me every week, Jason. I miss our mysterious library chats. Now, you mentioned a conference you were at that was coming up, and you talked about some of the things you're into. Can you maybe throw out some, like, where do people get your books? Where do people see you at the next con? Where do people keep up with what you're doing?
Right now, the best way is just YouTube, Facebook. That's where if I post something, it's probably going to be there, or Instagram. So yeah, just follow me on Facebook. At some point in the near future, the website will be back up and running. But this weekend, yes, Flat Rock is correct. It's whichever one's in the otter costume. That's who wins the fight. But this weekend, I will, which is the 26th, for those of you who may be, watching in the future, I'll be at the Lake Worth Monster Bash in Fort Worth, and it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be tire tossing, and Lyle, me, and a few others are going to be doing presentations, and I'll have my stuff there. May even be doing sketches if they'll let me.
Man, I wish I could be there. It sounds like just an absolute blast.
Oh, it'd be great, and you can actually have barbecue.
I thought you were going to say I'll toss you like a tire.
You know what?
Goatman style.
Goatman style. That'd be fun too. I'd pay to see that, actually.
I'd just be flying through the air. Man, it was such a great joy chatting to you tonight. Thank you so much for coming on. It always is one of my favorite shows of the year or the month or the quarter, or however often I can get you on to do it when you come and talk weird with me, Jason.
I love talking weird with you, Dean.
Well, until I get to talk to you and everybody else out there again, I hope everybody can just relax and keep it weird.
Thank you.